Rebecca Coriam was a 24-year-old woman who was working as a children's entertainer on a Disney cruise ship when she disappeared in the early hours of the 22nd of March 2011. Disney were quick to insist that Rebecca had been swept off the ship by an unusual rogue wave. Yet Rebecca's parents insist they are covering up something far more sinister. This is the tragic case of Rebecca Coriam. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me. Today's case is, as far as I'm concerned, unsolved, and it's one that I think has got so many questions still that have been left unanswered. I wanted to cover it because I think it's really important to breathe new life into cases that to some degree have gone cold, and also to pressure those who may have information, particularly when it comes down to Disney themselves, to actually release that information to the family so that they can have some level of peace and closure. It's almost impossible when you have a member of your family missing and you don't know what happened to them to ever move forward in your life. It just leaves a wound that's absolutely enormous and that has no chance of ever healing. For those of you who are new to my channel, I release my content on a Wednesday and a Sunday. Crime and consistency is my catchphrase. So if you like knowing what's happening to you on a day-to-day level and you enjoy my content, why don't you subscribe? Get your notifications on so you never miss an episode. And I will be dropping in extra episodes now and then because I love you guys. Also, to all of you supporting me on YouTube membership and on Patreon, thank you. Can't do this without you. Let's talk about today's really sad case. So Rebecca Coriam, she was born on the 11th of March 1987. She was born in the Countess of Chester Hospital in Chester. Chester is a lovely place in the UK. It really is. It's in the north of England, and it's one of those places and spaces that I go when I want a really nice day out. It's a little bit more upmarket than where I live, and certainly I've had countless lovely times there when my children were growing up and just spending opportunities to go on a little bit of a shop and have a coffee with my mum. So it's a place that I know very, very well. And she grew up in Chester. She lived with her very loving parents, Anne and Mike, and also her sister Rachel. They also had two foster brothers, and I genuinely think that demonstrates the mark of a family when people are willing to open their home to children who often come from backgrounds that have been less privileged than their own, and to offer them a family experience. And I think that speaks volumes about Anne and Mike, the fact that they've brought young people into their household to give them opportunities they wouldn't normally have, and also to just educate Rachel and Rebecca on how to be good, compassionate human beings who recognise how lucky they are and want to share that with other people who are less fortunate, in this case, the foster boys who come into their home. She attended Chester Catholic High School, which is a lovely high school, and obviously it's got the religious side to it. She also was quite an advocate when she was growing up. She got involved in lots of positive things. She worked at Chester Zoo when she was young. Apparently other relatives of hers had worked there previously. There's actually a memorial bench there for her grandparents, Kevin and Dolores. Rebecca was a very active teenager, and I think a very well-adjusted teenager from what I can tell. She joined the British Army Cadets as a teenager. The Army Cadets basically aims to inspire young people between the ages of 12 and 18. They want them to challenge their limits. It's all about helping them to grow their abilities, to go further in life. And it's a community-based Army Cadet force, and they also have a school-based combined cadet force. And should you wish to go and join the forces later in life, it's obviously really helpful to have had this experience. So she does all of these things, then she gets a staff volunteer position within the cadets. So at this point she's heavily involved with camping and other outdoor activities. So we're talking about a young girl growing up through her teens, doing really inspiring stuff and taking it as far as she can essentially go as a young person, doing good deeds for others by volunteering and going and doing lots of outdoorsy stuff, which is excellent for mental health and self-esteem and confidence building. This is a young woman who is grabbing the world and life with both hands. She then goes on to study sports science at the Exeter campus of Portsmouth University. Portsmouth is a lovely place, absolutely a naval area. carrier as well, so it's got the docks, etc. And this would be completely in line, I suppose, with this potential direction that she's taking herself in, where it comes down to being in something like the services, or indeed as she moves forward into a life at sea. Now, after graduating from university, Rebecca moved to the US for 4 months to teach sports at Camp America in Maine. Now, any of you who've done Camp America, you will know that it is hard work. I mean, it's an incredible experience, and it means that you get to put so many skills into practice and learn new ones, but the working hours are long and the pay is poor. So this is a young woman who's devoted to getting as much from her life as possible. She's motivated by experience, not by money, so to speak. And for somebody so young, we're talking about her just getting through her university degree and then just going off teaching sports in Camp America. She's been a volunteer with the cadets. She's worked at a zoo. This is somebody who is not work shy and is full of possibility and potential. Now, in June 2010, she gets hired by Disney. So she went to London for an interview for a Disney cruise job. And she was very successful. It's unsurprising. What I've found out about Rebecca is that people said she had this energy about her that was very unusual. It was very attractive, and therefore when you're in an interview and you kind of have that about your character and personality, understandably people warm to you. And when you think about Disney, and those of you who've been lucky enough, as I have, to actually go and spend time at Disney, the energy the workers need is insane. Like, seriously, I would have been sacked on week 2 when they'd found me asleep somewhere, probably on one of the rides, because you need to be smiling all the time. You need to always be on the job. When you are front facing and the public are looking at you, you need to be 150% or 150% of the time. It's as simple as that. So her energy is perfect for this kind of role. So after she's been successful, she then goes and receives training at Disney's theme parks in Florida. This is after she's been hired. She actually becomes a children's entertainer on a Disney cruise ship. Now, bear in mind, I have myself worked as a group leader for PGL, which is an organisation in the UK. Brilliant fun, absolutely insane hours, beyond belief, and you never get to switch off, essentially. And believe me, working for PGL is nothing like as intense or challenging as it is working for Disney. And when you're on a cruise ship and you're constantly going to be looking after other people's children and making sure they're having a great time, you've got to have an energy and temperament to do that. It's going to be difficult to mask really struggling with mental health when you're smiling away 24/7 with children on a Disney cruise ship. And she actually spent 4 months on cruises to the Bahamas. This is where the ships happen to be registered. Now, after this initial 4 months, she requests 2 months off, and during that period, her grandfather sadly dies. So she goes back to Chester to spend some time with her family. Sadly for the family, this is going to be the last time they essentially see her alive. But again, it speaks volumes about the kind of connection that she has with the people that she loves. When there are problems in life, such as her grandfather being ill and dying, she's back in the womb of those people who love her. We're talking about very close connections. This is a loving, connected, supportive family. Now, when Rebecca returns to work, she goes on a cruise ship named the Disney Wonder. That was actually based in the port of Los Angeles, and she was on the ship for 6 weeks before she disappeared. Now, during that period of time, she's visiting all ports of call on the Mexican Riviera, and she also went through the Panama Canal, which is really exciting. I mean, you genuinely are working hard, but you're seeing the world. And when it comes down to being a staff member on these ships, even though it is intense, they still get breaks, they get to go and see places they've never seen before. And I imagine that's a very alluring quality. She had constant contact with her family. She was using Facebook, she was calling them through Skype. And then on the 21st of March 2011, Rebecca sends what would essentially be her last message ever to them on Facebook. And that message indicates that she's going to call them the next day. The ship leaves the Los Angeles port that day to begin this new cruise. 12 hours later, this is on the 22nd of March, Rebecca's parents get a horrific phone call. Now, obviously, when they see a call coming in from what they expect is Rebecca, they hope that she's calling to give them an update on what's happening. Instead, it's an official from Disney. And that official is telling them that Rebecca is missing. And I cannot even imagine how that would feel. You are basically a world away from a child that you love. You believe they're in a safe place, enjoying what they're doing, and then all of a sudden you are confronted by the reality that this image is as far away from the truth as it could possibly be. And your child, because to any parent, it doesn't matter whether your child is 2, 22 or 42, they are your baby. And their child has just disappeared. They have no opportunity to immediately get there. You have to plan these things. You know that your child, as far as you're concerned, will never voluntarily disappear. You think they're happy, and now you're suddenly being told they can't find her. And you know that that ultimately means that there's a strong likelihood she's gone overboard. That must have been intolerable. Every second must have felt like a lifetime. Now at 9 a.m. that morning, the Wonder, which was just off the coast of Mexico at this point, was bound for Puerto Vallarta and Cabo San Lucas. Apparently, Rebecca fails to report for her shift. She wasn't in a room. She didn't report once they actually paged her over the ship's PA system. So they're starting to get obviously very clearly worried that she's just disappeared. And then they do a review of the CCTV footage and they find that there's only one appearance of her, and this is at 5:45 a.m. Now in the video, Rebecca appears distressed. She's actually using the ship's internal phone in the crew quarters to make that call. And she obviously looks a little bit upset because a young man goes over to her and appears to ask her if she's okay. And you can see her mouthing, yeah, fine. She then hangs up the phone, she walks away, she pushes her hair back behind her ear and she puts her hands in her back pockets. And these apparently are mannerisms that her parents say are very, very common for Rebecca. Now, the knowledge here is that there is obviously something that's going on for Rebecca in this moment that has meant that she's made that call, and also indicates that she's going through a level of distress. But we've all been in situations like that. We've all been in scenarios where we're upset about something. We want to call somebody and have that conversation. It doesn't ultimately mean that there's anything terrible happening in our life or that we're about to do something to cause ourselves critical injury or death. Often the reason that we're making those phone calls is because we've got something that we want to discuss or solve. So just because she's seen upset on camera doesn't suggest that she's about to do anything catastrophic to herself. Now, another crew member, they actually claimed that the timeline was different. They said that they believe she'd gone overboard at 3 a.m. Now, that would have been 3 hours earlier. That claim, I will say, remains unverified, but it has been noted. But she's seen on CCTV, so it can't be correct that she went overboard 3 hours earlier. And there has essentially been no record whatsoever of her presence anywhere since then. So that's the timeline that we've been told when it comes down to her disappearing. Now, apparently, once it's recognised that she's disappeared, the crew start searching the Disney Wonder for Rebecca. Bear in mind, this ship is big, so it could accommodate 2,400 passengers with 875 staterooms and also around 1,000 crew members. It had 11 public decks, it's 1,000 feet in length. So with that much space, it's absolutely understandable that it's going to take time to actually look in every nook and cranny to see whether she's there. And if she was missing, essentially, she could go undetected for a period of time if she was alive. But arguably, I think every single person listening to what I'm saying now is going to be thinking to themselves, well, surely the most important thing is before any ship goes anywhere from this point, they absolutely verify whether Rebecca is actually overboard or otherwise. The captain of the ship does notify the US Coast Guard that they think Rebecca has gone overboard, and then ships from both the US Coast Guard and the Mexican Navy do a search, but it's unsuccessful. So they look through the waters where the Wonder had been sailing, and they note the areas that expected her to have been during the hours that apparently she had gone missing. But in spite of this, they don't turn up anybody. They don't find her. But if she has gone overboard, you can imagine the expansiveness of the ocean. I'm sure many of you feel the same as me, even though I think it's absolutely beautiful to see. It terrifies me because it just is beautiful and equally ominous. It just is so deep and vast, and it must be looking literally for a needle in a haystack when you're looking for a person who might have gone overboard. When they start the investigation, because obviously the police need to get involved, it's really challenging because the Wonder is registered in the Bahamas. So that means a detective from the Royal Bahamas Police Force is the one who's in charge of the investigation. So he flies to the ship and he goes and does this investigation once it's returned to LA. That's 3 days after Rebecca's disappearance. That's deeply concerning, isn't it? 3 days is a hell of a long time when you think about contamination of evidence, lack of forensic opportunities. You literally have 3 days where anything can happen to prevent people truly understanding what's gone on, where a crime is played out, if a crime is played out. I will also note that whilst when you go online and look at what the Royal Bahamas Police Force is about, you'll see it advertised very differently to how it plays out in reality. So they advertise it as this large and intricate 21st century law enforcement agency with over 4,000 officers, reserves, police, civilians. They say that the police force provides policing services to all residents and all visitors of the Bahamas. And it goes on about how amazing they are. But I'll tell you now, the Bahamas police force isn't amazing. In fact, there are huge problems within it. And even those people who become police officers and end up working for them often leave and then, shall we say, put some pretty negative comments out there. In fact, it was noted that they can't even solve a situation where somebody is basically robbed across the road from the police station in full public display in broad daylight. That is the way that people talk about the Bahamas police. So we're not starting off well because of these weird political divides where, oh, the ship's registered here, therefore we're going to have to take it forward. Really, if it's a UK citizen, the UK police should immediately be involved. It's as simple as that. But that's not how these things work. So it has to be investigated by an official from the Bahamas, not the US or the UK, for tax reasons. And I imagine the family will be horrified when they realise that, because even though every police department has its problems, when you're working with somebody from the UK and you come from the UK, you just have more of a trust. It's a world that you know, and you also feel that they're more likely to have an investment personally in solving any situation like this because they are dealing with one of their own citizens. But it turns out that Superintendent Paul Roll is put in charge of the case. Now, whilst he's given that, obviously Rebecca's parents are flying over to the ship as well. That detective was said to have undertaken several days of onboard investigations, but when Rebecca's parents actually talked to him, he said he'd only spent 1 day on board before flying back home. I mean, can you imagine how heartbreaking that would be? If you are Rebecca's parents and you're thinking to yourself, at least there is an officer of the law coming to look at what's happened and to really intricately connect the dots, because that's what you need to do. You're dealing with a massive ship with a massive amount of people. That means you need to talk to so many because you don't know who has seen what. You need to be aware of the CCTV. You need to be drawing maps of what positions would be something that could provoke a problem if, for example, you were to go overboard. Where's the CCTV in relation to that? You're going to want to pinpoint exactly what could have played out. So you're going to have theories and you're going to be analysing those different theories. Okay, so theory one is that she did indeed go overboard by mistake. It was an accident. Theory two, did she take her own life? Did she go overboard of her own volition? Theory three, was she running from somebody? Was she being chased? Is that how she ended up overboard? Number four, was she forcefully thrown overboard? You want to be looking at every single one of those threads of possibility and theorising how each of those could have played out. And you do that by good old policing, which is interviewing lots and lots and lots of people, going around the ship and figuring out exactly where all the CCTV is, and then coming to terms with the potential possibilities that played out and which ones look most likely of those potentials. 1 day on board won't even have seen the ship itself. It's too big. This is somebody who is completely inept. We're going to have to call it as it is. That is not an investigation. It's a pathetic excuse for an investigation. I would go and do a better investigation. I've not had a day's training in being a detective, but I tell you what, it doesn't take a genius to know that it involves a lot of talking to people and a lot of theorising and analysing, and it's going to take a lot of time. But no, not for this detective. This detective is obviously somebody who's a bit like Inspector Gadget and can just do it all really quickly by himself, said no good investigator ever. Now, the detective also said that he'd interviewed a few crew members. Oh, by the way, he didn't interview any of the passengers, not one of them. So he goes, does nothing, flies back home. It would cripple you as a parent knowing this ineptitude exists. And this is the person who's meant to be leading the investigation into Rebecca's disappearance. And even best, the pièce de résistance is that this detective, in less than 24 hours, doing no investigation whatsoever, concludes Rebecca's death was not suspicious. Not suspicious at all. I mean, wouldn't it be great if all situations could be solved so quickly? You know, that we were just so adept at being able to just come to these conclusions and do it correctly. Aside from you can't, can you? Because you can't come to a correct conclusion when you don't bother investigating. So basically, he's arrived, done jack all, looked around, said, oh well, nobody's fault, she's just gone overboard. Now, that is poor policing at best and dangerous policing at worst. Probably both of them, to be honest. Her parents, of course, are desperate to figure out what's happened. And they said from the immediate experience of going to the actual ship, they knew that Disney did not want anybody to be aware of what was playing out. So Disney kept them in a car with blacked out windows. They also brought them on board via a very rarely used side entrance. This is after all the passengers had left the ship. And her family said it was obvious they didn't want us to leave the hotel alone. The Wonder's captain basically said that he was sorry. So he expressed his theory that Rebecca had basically been washed overboard by a rogue wave whilst she was at the crew pool. Now, her parents doubted that. And I guess that's because there are really high walls around it. So it feels unlikely, particularly in reference to the fact it wasn't a very rough night, that would have played out. It must be very difficult for the family to feel that no one wants them there either. You know, the darkened windowed car and making sure the passengers were off the ship before they came on. But equally, I do have some sympathy towards Disney because they're running a business and they don't want their passengers to be freaked out by the idea that something terrible has happened to a member of their crew, and keeping it hush hush is their main priority. It shouldn't be, because a life is incalculably important and Rebecca has a great meaning to the world, but they are corporate and that's what corporate environments do. They shut down and keep people out. And I think that the problem with that is it immediately makes you suspicious, because why should they have anything to hide? At the end of the day, the only question here should be what has happened to Rebecca and how do we figure out what to do next with the information that we've garnered, as opposed to we don't want her parents here because it's making us look bad. Now, the parents, when they're going through all this and after they've spoken to the captain, they're taken to a meeting with Disney executives and also the woman that Rebecca had been speaking to on the phone in the CCTV footage. Now, they weren't allowed to speak to any members of the crew, which would have been so frustrating because that's how you find out whether anybody's got any bits of information that you can put together in the jigsaw. But also they weren't allowed a copy of the CCTV footage. And that's distressing because these kind of things are so important in forming a picture of what happened to Rebecca, and they're not allowed to have access to it. So the family said everything was staged by Disney. We were taken in a car with blacked out windows on the boat's back entrance as passengers disembarked from the front. They took us to a room where they played the CCTV footage of Rebecca, where largely she appears to be fine. So they're indicating there is nothing that suggests she's in such a distressed state that potentially she decided to end her life, because understandably that is going to be one of the theories. Now, after this, her parents were given her personal belongings. They were also given a pair of flip-flops. They were told that they were Rebecca's flip-flops. They were found on the edge of deck 5, which is where the crew pool area is, which is obviously where the captain's theorised she's gone over because of this rogue wave. And her parents said they weren't her shoes. They literally had someone else's name written on the side with a different cabin number. That in itself is bizarre. And also, what a weird thing to do where Disney are concerned. I mean, handing over another person's literal flip-flops with their name on and the cabin number. They don't belong to your daughter. You know they don't belong to your daughter because it literally says it on the flip-flops. But They're trying to create this scenario, aren't they, where there's nothing to see here. It's just one of those awful accidents. Really sorry, now off you go. Can you please get off our ship because we don't want to disturb or disrupt any of the individuals who are meant to be here having a fun holiday with Disney. So they're thinking about people having the best time of their lives. They're not thinking about Rebecca's family who are having the worst time of their lives. Now, a few weeks after they've had to deal with this situation and they're back home, Rebecca's parents get an email from her bank saying there's been some activity on her bank account. So her credit card had been used. Now, at this point, you can imagine, can't you? They're thinking, oh my God, Rebecca could still be alive. So at this point, they do a social media push and they just basically plead for her safe return. And one can only begin to imagine that horrible feeling of ultimately this could be somebody else using her bank card. And how have they got access to that bank card? What has happened to our daughter? Because if it isn't her, who is it? Now, on the day before the first anniversary of her disappearance, Rebecca's father then gets an email from a woman who basically said that she'd seen Rebecca with a dark-haired man on the street in Venice in August 2011. And that woman said that she was 85% sure it was Rebecca and that seeing the family's website had literally jogged her memory. Rebecca's uncle said it was just an email, but it seemed legitimate. And he also went on to say it was really upsetting for everyone to think she could be out there somewhere after all that time. But the uncle wondered how Rebecca would have been able to get to Venice without her passport because they had them along with the belongings that her parents recovered from her quarters. So even though to some degree you've got this sighting, it's a sighting that doesn't necessarily add up. People do look like one another. People do have their memories jogged, but they also do remember things inaccurately. And I genuinely think in this case, that particular email was from somebody who was trying to do a good thing, but probably wasn't based in an accurate reality. We get to October 2011. The investigative journalist John Ronson, who's a journalist for The Guardian, he got the Coriam family's blessing to basically go and do an undercover investigation. So he went on the Disney Wonder and took the same route it did when Rebecca went missing to make it as real as possible for him. He, I would say very discreetly, asked questions to the crew members on the cruise who were at the time of Rebecca's disappearance working. Now, every single person who was on the crew wanted to remain anonymous. Makes perfect sense. You don't want to be upsetting your employers. But it also speaks of a wall of silence and an expectation by Disney to toe the line, even if that isn't in the best interests of the staff. So you should be able to openly talk about these things. At the end of the day, Disney, the overarching company, aren't the person or people responsible for this occurring, whatever played out. They should openly and willingly discuss what they think occurred where Rebecca's disappearance is concerned. And they should certainly, if they've got any worries about sinister activity, be rooting that out immediately. And the fact that the members of the crew don't feel that they can just openly and freely talk, that suggests that there is a pressure on them to remain silent. And again, that shouldn't be a concern when we're talking about an incalculably important human being who has literally disappeared. Now, many of the crew members, they said that a lot more was known about Rebecca's fate than Disney or the Bahmanian police were actually admitting. One crew member said, and I quote, "Disney knows exactly what happened. The phone call she had, it was taped. Everything here is taped. There's CCTV everywhere. Disney have the tape." Another crew member, they said, and this was a close friend of Rebecca, that there was an underlying sadness within her. Now, again, I would note that subjective experience as a human being means that you believe what you often wish to believe, whether that's rooted in truth or otherwise. We're all guilty of that. At the end of the day, we like to think that we have an intuition about the people that we love around us. And this particular friend of hers saying that she had an underlying sadness within her, that might have been present, that might not. It might have been a conversation they had on one occasion where Rebecca was struggling and then she was absolutely fine, but that clouds the judgment of this particular individual. Equally, she might have had a sadness within her. But when we're talking about somebody with suicidal ideation, when we're talking about a woman with suicidal ideation as well, let me tell you, it is pretty unusual for a woman to kill herself in a violent way. I'm not saying that we don't. I'm saying it's a lot rarer that we actually do it in very violent ways. And throwing yourself overboard because you are struggling is something that ultimately you would expect there was a graduation to. So people around you may well be thinking that there are problems going on and that you're struggling, and you eventually end your life in such a catastrophic manner, and there's a no going back reality to that. Like I said, it's a very big challenge to do something so grave with your body and with your life, and it's a very, very terrifying way to die if you've chosen and elected to actually throw yourself overboard. And there is nothing that is really strongly saying that she has suicidal ideation or she is thinking of killing herself. Now, whilst Ronson is doing this investigation, he looks at open areas of the ship where the passengers are allowed to go. But because Rebecca apparently really liked to exercise, which is really good for mental health, I do feel that she looked after herself mentally and physically. And again, that indicates somebody who is managing their mental health to some degree. I'm just saying that from my perspective analytically. I can't say that she wasn't struggling. She's a human being. She probably was struggling. I imagine being on a ship working hard is quite isolating. I imagine that you go through periods that are up and down. But like I know, she's doing things that are really good for her mental health, like exercise. He then, within this investigation, after recognising that she has a particular route that she takes when she goes jogging, he thinks to himself that she probably slipped on deck 4 while she was jogging or while she was on a running track. So this is an area apparently with low railings, and he felt in that investigation that that could allow for an accident. But if that's the case, well, that area of the ship is really well covered by security cameras. Now, Ransom brought this theory up to a deck worker, and the deck worker said everyone knows where she went missing. She went overboard on deck 5. So that's the same deck as a crew pool. So at this point, he's told to go up to the deck 10 to look down from where the crew pool's visible. And he stated that the crew swimming pool had basically no view of the ocean because behind the railings was this really high steel wall, which reached far above head height. And he felt it would be impossible for someone to accidentally fall overboard there. Also, there were, as we'd expect, those conspicuously mounted security cameras. Now, obviously, it could be that after she went missing, they installed those cameras, but one would imagine there'd have been cameras there before. There's CCTV everywhere for the protection of Disney and for the protection of passengers. So I think we can all assume there would be footage of what happened to Rebecca. Why hasn't that footage been shared? Now, most of the crew members who actually spoke with Ronson, they were just insistent that she'd gone overboard from the crew pool. Near the end of his voyage and investigation, another crew member actually came and spoke to him. And they explained that even though the walls around the pool are actually high, because the seas can get really rough, she could have been tossed off the ship, especially apparently if the decks and the walls were slippery, which it would be if waves are crashing over the side. And the worker said that a friend of his had once had to guide an employee inside under similar conditions because the offence of being outside on the pool deck in those conditions was basically serious enough that Disney sent that particular employee home. So they don't like it if you're putting yourself at risk, and understandably so. Now, after Ronson's trip on the Disney Wonder, he receives a call, and he receives a call from a woman who's called Melissa. Now, it's a fake name, but somebody will call Melissa because that's how they're referred to in the report. And apparently Melissa was one of Rebecca's really close friends. She said that she saw Rebecca at 11 p.m. the night before she went missing. And it was really strange because after Rebecca went missing, Disney apparently held a ceremony putting flowers at the wall next to the crew pool. But they refused to answer any questions about why they placed them there. They also said that the flip-flops Disney gave to Rebecca's parents, as we know, were not hers. And this particular person said, we knew they weren't hers, they were too big and they certainly weren't her style. And that's before, as we noted, they're actually engraved with somebody else's name. Melissa also went on to say, Disney swear they've told us everything they know, which is that they don't know anything. But most of us think, bullshit, someone's covering something up. Melissa went on to say that Disney was suppressing what happened to Rebecca to try to protect the brand. And Melissa, in her mind, thinks that Rebecca went to the crew pool at 6 a.m. to be alone with absolutely no intention, Melissa said, of Rebecca harming herself. She said that Rebecca absolutely loved Deck 5. She said it's where we always used to go. And I bet she climbed onto the wall and sat on the ledge in a, I need to feel like I'm off the ship for a second way. She wouldn't have thought it's really high, I might fall off. She'd just have sat on it and thought, oh crap, what have I done? And fell. She then went on to say, security on that ship is ultra tight. You can't get on or off without your ID card. Down by the crew pool, there's HR offices, the crew gym, the crew office that deals with passports, money, documentation, and they're saying there's no CCTV cameras. Ronson asked Melissa, well, why would they suppress that? And she said, to protect the brand. If it was 6 a.m. and they were doing their job and watching the front, someone must have seen her go over. Or if they didn't, they're covering up why they didn't. Then she says, Bex made hundreds of people happy. The passengers loved her. They all loved her. You'd think Disney would give something back. They owe it to her to find out what's happened. Melissa's right, isn't she? When it comes down to it, if they've got information they're suppressing, the family deserve to know, but they should also want to know what happened to Rebecca to prevent any of these things ever happening again. Now, looking at Rebecca's personal life, there were some twists and turns. So it's really important to explore that. So in August 2017, Rebecca's seeing a girl called Tracy Medley, and she ends up speaking to the Sun newspaper because Tracy also worked on the Disney Wonder as a children's entertainer. And Tracy came out and said that she and Rebecca were apparently madly in love at the time. So even though we see one side of Rebecca being really bubbly and clearly somebody who's very effervescent in nature, what Tracy introduces is the idea that there's another side to her. So she says the idea of Rebecca as being this happy and bubbly person that was full of life. She said, I've spent 6 years reading bullshit claims from Rebecca's family that her disappearance to them could not possibly be due to suicide. She said the family want to blame somebody. So she tells the Sun that Rebecca was in turmoil because she'd been raped as a teenager, which is horrific. I mean, of course, she's going to have post-trauma of that. Also, she said that Rebecca used cocaine and she'd once got so emotional that she banged her head against the ship's steel walls. With respect though, Tracy, chatting to the Sun newspaper, just going to throw it out there. A lot of people use cocaine occasionally. It's very different using cocaine occasionally than being a full-blown addict. And let me tell you, I've worked in the media for nearly 2 decades, and I have first-hand seen people in the media, in front of the camera, behind the camera, using cocaine recreationally. The idea that people who use cocaine are low-class individuals who've got issues in their life is BS. It's a recreational drug, makes people really boring, talk about themselves far too much and be overconfident, in my opinion. But, you know, a lot of people use it. It doesn't mean you've got mental health issues. Usually just means you're going out and having a bit of a party. I'm not, by the way, suggesting people should ever use drugs to do these things with. I actually, like I said, think your life is a lot better without any of this stuff. But nonetheless, that doesn't make you suicidal. Now, being raped as a teenager, highly traumatic, absolutely goes without saying. But this woman, Rebecca, who we're talking about in this case, is somebody who's a go-getter. Her self-esteem, her confidence is something that she's working on constantly. She is going and grabbing opportunities with both hands. This isn't somebody who is really notably struggling. And yet she once got so emotional she banged her head against the ship's steel walls again. If you've ever seen a younger person, and Rebecca is younger, you've not reached your emotional maturity. Sometimes you act in a very dramatic fashion in rows. We see this. I'm sure many of you have been in situations where somebody who's quite peaceful has done something like punched a wall or a door. It's not because they are a broken human being, it's because they haven't yet developed the sense of self that makes them manage their emotions more appropriately. So just because we've got her doing this on one occasion, and just because apparently she's taking cocaine at times, that doesn't speak of somebody who's absolutely at the end of their tether with their life. But Tracy goes on to say that Rebecca apparently felt like a misfit. Who doesn't when you're in your 20s? Can anybody answer that question on a postcard? Everyone feels like a misfit in their 20s. You spend your entire 20s trying to be what you think you're meant to be. Then you get to your 30s and you're like, oh, shouldn't have done any of that. I've wasted a decade. Now I'll just be who I am. Your 20s is about self-development. It's often isolating. It can be really challenging because you're growing into the person that you're becoming. You're leaving youth, you're growing into adulthood, and it's hard work. Tracy also said that apparently Rebecca was worried that her family was really ashamed of her because she was a lesbian, but there's no evidence to say that was true. There's no evidence to say that her family was anything but supportive, and certainly the way they've acted after she's disappeared demonstrates that they 100% supported her. And also, it's not unusual for somebody who's having sexuality issues to feel that people won't accept them. It's a sad reality that you face more problems, more prejudice when you are somebody who doesn't fit the, shall we say, entirely typical model of the heterosexual individual. The world can be a little bit crueler, and you can internalize that and think that that's going to mean that people who love you aren't going to love you as much when you're honest about who you are. But there's no evidence to say that her family were negative to her. This could just have been her expressing her feelings to somebody that she trusted, probably imagining that she could discuss that with somebody that she had a level of trust with, as opposed to imagining that a few years later they might sell the story to the Sun. Tracy described the relationship that she had with Rebecca as wild fun, as passionately intense, but admitted that Rebecca was actually quite frustrated because Tracy didn't commit to her seriously. And the reason for this is, shall we say, Tracy had a more complex love life. So at the time of the relationship with Rebecca, Tracy actually had a boyfriend who was on shore leave. That was the ship's barman, a guy called Devon Hyde. Now, when Devon returns to the ship, Tracy gets back with him. And that apparently left Rebecca devastated, which it would. If you intensely like someone, like, oh, I'm just going to go back to my boyfriend. Just going to throw it out there, Tracy. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You know, you're having some intimate relationship with this girl who is going through some challenges regarding the way that she perceives herself in a sexual relationship with a woman. And the way you answer that is to just casually reject her and go back to your boyfriend. I mean, that's not going to be painful at all, is it? That in itself demonstrates that Rebecca is going to feel a level of isolation. It's really hard when you have to watch somebody that you're really into being with someone else. Tracy went on in this article to say, the night before she went missing, I remember her being upset with me again. Yeah, I imagine she was, because you were sleeping with your boyfriend again and she was being cast to the side. She said she started drinking, and while we went to walk back to her room, she'd scream, cry, punch herself in the face and bang her head against the walls of the ship. She said it took 4 of us to calm her down. We ended up carrying her to my room. Now, again, there is a context to that. This isn't Rebecca just losing her mind over nothing. This is Rebecca having a drink. We all know how that can go. We all know that when you have too much to drink, you can become highly emotional. Even when you're not feeling that emotional, you can end up thinking about something and becoming super emotional. But when you are going through a scenario where somebody that you potentially are falling in love with has rejected you and is now back with a guy, and you're desperate for them to want you, of course you're going to be upset. And she expresses herself through doing these things, but it's contextual. It makes sense that she was upset. Tracy went on to say, the same night, Rebecca woke me up and said something along the lines of feeling like a failure because she wasn't brave enough to jump off the ship. Does that make her suicidal? In my opinion, not at all. What it suggests is that she feels a little bit desperate about her relationship ending, and she probably wants to provoke some kind of reaction from Tracy, such as, I don't know, bit of sympathy, bit of empathy, bit of compassion, Tracy. Maybe that's what she was asking for. You know, I'm going to sound really dramatic now so that you maybe are kind to me. Those kind of things are so common when people are in scenarios where the relationship has ended. So as much as Tracy is coming in with her family are talking bullshit, to be honest, Tracy, it sounds a little bit like you have some guilt there. It really does. I'm not saying she did anything to Rebecca. I'm saying there's a bit of guilt there ultimately, isn't there? Because if she was a little bit desperate, if she was feeling a little bit broken, if she was feeling a bit like a misfit, well, you getting back with your boyfriend and basically rejecting her when she has these intense feelings for you, that's certainly going to make her feel all of those feelings, which means that you have a level of responsibility regarding the way that she felt. As opposed to it being, oh, it's BS that she was this happy, smiley girl. It's like, yeah, probably it was at that moment in time because you started screwing with your boyfriend again, as opposed to being in a relationship with her when she really liked you. Now, the following evening, this is the 20th of March 2011, Rebecca had drinks in the bar with Tracy and Devon, which for me is like a dagger to the heart. If I was Rebecca, I'd be giving them a wide berth. But that speaks volumes, doesn't it? Rebecca obviously wants to continue a relationship with Tracy to some degree, and she also wants to appear normal because it could be that Devon wasn't really that aware that Tracy and her had got it on to the degree that they had. So it's keeping this normality, but it must be very painful. And it ends up that all three of them go to bed together. So they have a threesome in Devon's room. And Tracy then said that Rebecca had borrowed some of Devon's clothes because she wanted to go for a walk afterwards. That would explain, of course, why she was wearing men's clothes in the CCTV footage. I think that the likelihood here is that Rebecca was just trying to cling on to Tracy. And personally, I think that she will have felt bad about having a threesome with Devon and with Tracy, because particularly if she is somebody who has decided that she likes girls, you don't want to be with a guy, even in this situation. So that's going to make her feel uncomfortable. And then we have to remember that if she has been raped as a young person, which is something that Tracy has said, then that's going to provoke a whole heap of quite challenging feelings because she may feel that she's been exploited in this situation. And I know that she's obviously actively chosen to do this, but I think she's done it because emotionally she wants to be close to Tracy and wants to be seen as okay and wants to be seen as someone who can have fun. But often people don't understand the impact and how it feels after you've done something like this, when you weren't necessarily psychologically, emotionally, or to be honest, just on a social level, prepared to deal with the ramifications and consequences of this kind of experience. Some people I know are totally liberal, they're fine, they can have sex with whoever they want as many times as they like, in as many different situations, and they're totally unscathed. But most of us don't feel that way. In fact, there are a huge amount of women who talk about the fact that threesomes that they thought were going to be good for them have actually ruined their lives. So it's one of those things that people enter into, often when they're a little bit drunk, and then the ramifications afterwards can be really upsetting for them. Now, I don't know what the motivations Tracy had for doing that interview with The Sun, but I do have to say that the notes that were made by Paul Roll, the superintendent who was meant to be dealing with this case, they kind of back up what she said. So he has in his notes that all three of them were drinking, they had sex on the night before Rebecca's disappearance. So it's noted as a consensual threesome. Rebecca's family don't feel this way. They think she was sexually assaulted and that any sex she would have had outside of the relationship with Tracy would have been forced. They actually believe that Rebecca was killed because she wouldn't agree to an open bisexual relationship with Tracy and Devon. Again, that might be a bit of a stretch, though I understand where her family are coming from. The idea of murdering somebody because they won't have a relationship with you openly, I think that whilst it's a theory that you can explore, it's probably unlikely that plays out in reality. But I also do completely have sympathy and empathy for Rebecca's parents because they all believe they know her in a way differently to other people and arguably will think that they know her better than others. But we all have to accept, and even as a human adult of my age, I accept that I didn't want my mum and dad to know certain things about who I've been and what I've done because they're my parents. And when my dad was alive, I wanted to be seen as this pure as the driven snow girl because it was important for me to have that reputation with him. I didn't want him to know about what I got up to in my private life at times because you're growing and developing and experimenting, and my parents would have a different opinion, therefore, to, for example, my husband about my experiences and my relational experience with him and what we've done. You know, it's just the way human beings are. You keep things separate where your parents are concerned. So I do understand that there is this mismatch between their perception of what could have happened to Rebecca and the way that they're projecting the blame onto Tracy and Devon. That noted, we cannot rule it out either. Now, two of Rebecca's friends who worked on the Disney Wonder with her, they visited her parents at home in Gilder Sutton, and they said that Rebecca was constantly scared of being raped or sexually assaulted on board the cruise ship. And I think that when you hear that, you think to yourself, why? Why would you be that scared? But let me tell you, I've done some digging, and it's pretty horrific what happens on certain cruise ships. So on just one cruise ship that I looked at, the Carnival Valor, they reported 9 sexual assaults to the FBI in less than 1 year on a cruise ship. And the reality is, people are on a cruise ship with no police. So once you leave the port, you're basically in international waters. Who do you think, therefore, is attracted to working on those ships? There's going to be a particular subsection of individuals who could be highly deviant. They could be individuals going to do things there that they know is going to be easier to get away with because there's no security, essentially. There aren't real police officers, etc. So your safety isn't as paramount as you may believe. And Anne and Mike Coriam, they also found out that Rebecca's favourite shorts had actually been ripped. So when they were handed back to them, they felt that that was actually evidence potentially of a violent struggle before her death. Again, that's them making these assumptions, but it's important to bring in that information. Now, when it comes down to the investigation that was carried out, it was awful. And Ronson, when he'd done his own, he reported that at the time his article was published, the Coriam family had received no further updates from Disney or the Bahamian police on the progress of the investigation. Mike Coriam said, whenever we call anyone, all they say is the investigation is ongoing. We've tried emailing, telling them how we feel, how it's getting harder, but nothing, just it's ongoing. Also, Superintendent Paul Roll, that amazing investigator who can do something in 24 hours that other people would take months to do, he never even answered Ronson's calls. Also, it's said that they never received final report on the investigation, which they'd been promised by the Bahamian police. And the British detectives who actually did receive the report have refused numerous Freedom of Information Act requests for a copy on the grounds that it contains restricted personal information. I mean, is it just me? Or should the police have to hand that report over? These are the parents of the person who's gone missing. What personal information can't be shared with the people who are suffering that loss? And also, when things aren't shared, it means that you have deep suspicion because you think to yourself, if there's nothing to hide, then don't hide it. If it's being hidden, there must be a reason for it being hidden. And it's appalling that British coppers have basically had sight of that report and the family haven't been allowed access to it. That is horrifying. Now, the British government officials also criticised the investigation. So in November 2011, the Coriams' local MP at the time, Stephen Mosley, he brought Rebecca's case up in the House of Commons. And he told Mike Penning, who's the Minister for Shipping at the time, that the investigation into Rebecca's disappearance was, quote, appalling. And it was appalling. He stated that Bahamian authorities made no attempt virtually at investigating Rebecca's disappearance. He said the police were internationally recognised as almost toothless. I do like that quote. It's absolutely true. Believe me, that police department, you're more likely to have your 95-year-old gran turn up evidence in a different country to where they're investigating. That's how bad they are. I promise you. Just put a group of toddlers on the case, you've got more opportunity to solve the crime. And this particular minister said very few people know when they are on board a ship that they are so poorly protected. He stated that the Bahamas did not have the investigative capabilities to deal with Rebecca's case. And that goes without saying. They sent one police officer, he was there for less than 24 hours, and apparently closed the case. Now, in response, the shipping minister, Penning, he announced that the Marine Accident Investigation Branch would investigate all deaths and disappearances of British citizens from vessels throughout the world. He said the government would work through the International Maritime Organization to increase international cooperation. Penning also critiqued Disney. He said that the company was more interested in getting the ship back to sea than in the case of investigating a missing member of their crew. Now, understandably, the family have felt powerless, and one of the things that they decided to do was to bring a lawsuit against Disney. So on the 25th of March 2014, Rebecca's parents filed a £45,000 lawsuit against Disney. It's just such a negligible amount, isn't it? But that's not what it's about. When you file a lawsuit, when you sue, you're doing it for a different reason. You just want people to take responsibility. Now, they claimed in this suit that Disney Cruise Liners acted negligently in waiting more than 4 hours, which is just insane to me. 4 hours to actually alert the US Coast Guard. That's more than 5 hours as well to contact the Mexican Navy, and nearly 7 hours to call the Bahamas police. How on earth did they wait that long? The suit claimed that Disney gave false and misleading information about the ship's position when it alerted the Coast Guard, which is horrific, because that would mean they were searching in the wrong area for Rebecca. They also alleged that Disney's security was inadequate, as was it surveillance for a person falling overboard, because apparently they've not turned over anything that indicates that they've got footage of her doing that. Therefore, it would have to be inadequate. Now, a Disney spokeswoman said, this incident has been investigated by the authorities. No, it wasn't really though, was it? Just gonna throw it out there. You can get your little spokeswoman out with a little clipboard out. This has been investigated by the authorities. How long was that investigation? It has been investigated. It's been investigated by the authorities. How many of the authorities? It's been investigated. It's all sorted. That's what we're saying. But if we actually go into the detail, just for my own benefit, let's go into the detail. So how many officers investigated it? One. Sorry? You're clearing your throat? One. Have you got a cold? One. I thought you said one. Yeah, I thought you said one. So one officer. How long did you take investigating it? Well, probably about 7 hours, if I'm really honest. Yeah, he was very effective. That's basically what happened. So saying the incident has been investigated by the authorities is ludicrous. One guy, a few hours, spoke to no one, did no actual investigating, theorised nothing, and just went, oh, there you go, she's just gone overboard by accident like it happens every day of the week. It's ludicrous. But this particular spokesperson went on to say the claims are without merit, as we will demonstrate in court. In 2015, both parties settled outside the court for an undisclosed amount, and also an agreement not to discuss the case publicly, which to me says Disney know what happened and they don't want it to get to court because they don't like their dirty washing being aired in public, essentially. But for the family, I guess at least them saying, okay, here's a certain amount of money, although it'll be nothing to the family, of course, they don't care about money. But at least that says there's a level of accountability. They didn't want it to go to court, but they've settled. And when you settle because you think you're going to lose. Now, Jim Walker, who's a Miami-based lawyer who actually represented Rebecca's family in that lawsuit, they said the Coriam family does not deserve, quote, Mickey Mouse games. So he believes that they're covering up what happened out of fear of adverse publicity. He also believes that they will have had the CCTV footage because he knew that the actual area that she was meant to have gone overboard is close to proximal places which have important documents like HR and payroll. So the CCTV, he believes, would have been there. So he believes that the cover-up would have been about Disney basically protecting themselves from charges of negligence because of how she would have died and how that would have been shown on the CCTV. So they wouldn't have wanted that information out there because that would essentially have made them culpable, and that's why they've done this cover-up operation. Now, former City of Chester MP Chris Matheson, he believes that Rebecca was the victim of a crime and possibly was sexually assaulted or murdered. He said, the more you look into this, the more it smells rotten. The more it smells like a crime has taken place. Matheson claims to have a copy of the original police report with, quote, compelling evidence to support this claim. And to some degree, Matheson's claim could also be supported by the notes taken by Superintendent Roll when he was questioning crew members on the 25th of March 2011. He actually interviewed Tracy and Devon, and he noted in those notes that Devon had a very nonchalant attitude when he was being questioned. Apparently he was laughing and joking, and the police officer had to give him a warning because he was acting really inappropriately when you were actually considering he's talking about the disappearance of Rebecca, particularly in light of the fact that he was meant to have had a sexual liaison and encounter with Rebecca only hours before. It's deeply concerning that Devon thought it was funny. I mean, what does that say about him? That makes him a bit of a smiling assassin, doesn't it, when you explore that particular attitude? Now, in 2016, the Coriam family hired a private investigator, a guy called John Anderson. Anderson actually worked with Matheson as well, and they said that records show the seas around the window were totally normal on the night of Rebecca's disappearance, so that cast doubt on Disney's rogue wave claim. Also, went on to say that any wave capable of taking Rebecca off the ship would have caused visible damage to it as well, and there wasn't. So he doesn't believe that she died in the way that we have been told she has died. This is one of those tales which has no conclusion. Rebecca Coriam disappeared. She's never been found. There's no body. There's no CCTV, apparently. There's no information that gives us a stronghold on what played out. But what we do know is that Rebecca Coriam's loss is something that her family have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. It's affected them dramatically. And there are these threads of unsolved reality to this situation. So was she a victim of sexual assault? Was she raped? Did she get murdered? Is she somebody who had an accident that they've got on CCTV that demonstrates that she went overboard, that's been withheld because they don't want a corporate disaster on their hands? Was it that she climbed onto something and went overboard? I think that's highly unlikely. I also think it's highly unlikely, with respect, having gone through this, that she took her own life. I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm going to tell you that I do not believe that she was in a suicidal scenario the night that she disappeared. The truth is, no one 100% knows the answers to this, apart from those who've probably got access to the CCTV that's been withheld, and potentially to some of the reports that many people haven't been given the full information and disclosure over. What I know is one thing: Rebecca Coriam's family have been denied justice, because until they are given all the important documents, until they get to see all the reports, until CCTV is disclosed of her movements that night fully, they will always have more questions than answers, and they don't deserve that. The truth is, Disney will continue surviving and thriving even if they're honest about this information. And it speaks to a bigger problem on these cruise ships, and that's the problem of safety. Having done the research that I've done, it's appalling the amount of sexual violations that occur on these ships, and people don't realise. So whilst cruising, I'm sure, for many of you is great fun, you really do need to think about your level of protection. Because like I said, when you've got inept investigators flying in and doing less than a day's investigating, when we're talking about the disappearance of this incredible human being, well, that speaks to a very unsafe situation for anyone who decides to pay their money to go on a Disney dream holiday, which could ultimately end in disaster. Something that certainly occurred for Rebecca Coriam. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Let me know if you've had any experiences on cruise ships where you yourself have found yourself in situations where you felt unsafe. Maybe you've worked on a cruise ship. Maybe you know Rebecca Coriam and you have information that you wish to share. I would love to know, because I would really wish for the family to have a level of understanding. You never get closure, but just a level of understanding about what on earth truly played out where Rebecca Coriam's disappearance is concerned. As ever, guys, look after yourself. I'll see you again next time.